I taught myself to control my dreams, but now I can't seem to stop. It wasn't always like this. As a teenager, I desperately wanted to learn how to lucid dream. I tried every trick I could find online, holding my hands out and counting my fingers, checking clocks to make sure the time made sense, even arranging books in a specific pattern to test my reality. I started drinking bizarre teas brewed from strange leaves I ordered off the internet, even though they tasted awful. But for all my effort, nothing worked, at least not right away. Ironically, it wasn't until I gave up and moved on that the dreams began to change. At first I was thrilled. I'd unlocked something incredible. I started filling my dusty old dream journal with detailed accounts of every place I visited, every person I met, every choice I made. At the end of each entry, I'd scrawl the same mantra over and over. Tonight, I'll lucid dream again. But the harder I chased the experience, the more elusive it became. Only when I let go of the obsession would I suddenly find myself staring at my hands in a dream, counting 6, 7, or even 8 fingers on one hand. One of my favorite dreams happened over a year ago. I was at work, grinding through another miserable shift at the cafe. Everything had been going wrong, and I could feel the customers' eyes on me, watching too closely. Something told me to look at my hands. Sure enough, they were twisted and malformed, fingers bending in impossible ways. A wave of relief and amusement washed over me. I was dreaming again. I inhaled deeply, composed myself, and reminded myself to keep quiet about my awareness. I didn't know why, but something inside me felt that letting the dream figures know I was awake might lead to complications. Still, my coworker, Sarah, noticed something was off. She gave me a sharp, unnerving look, her head tilting slightly as her eyes narrowed. "Claire?" she asked slowly, her voice low and drawn out. "Nothing," I replied quickly, waving my hands like I was brushing her concern away. "It's nothing. This doesn't matter anyway." Her expression darkened, and she opened her mouth as if to say something, but I shut my eyes and spun in place. When I opened them again, the cafe was empty. The strange customers and Sarah were gone, replaced by a single familiar figure. The man I couldn't let go of, even in my dreams. Let's call him Jack. Not his real name, but close enough. My obsession with him wasn't something I was proud of, but at least here, in my dreams, I could make him stay. Jack appeared in nearly all my lucid dreams. I'd summon him on purpose, crafting scenarios where he became the famous musician he'd always dreamed of being. In this one, I served him a coffee and sheepishly told him I admired his work. Even though we were alone, I played it coy, pretending not to fan over him too much. He smiled warmly, thanked me, and invited me to sit with him. "I can't," I said, trying to sound playful. "I'm still working." Jack glanced around the empty cafe, his side profile sharp and perfect. "I don't see any customers," he teased, resting his chin on his hand. Caught off guard, I stammered, "Well, yeah, but I didn't think you'd notice that." His smile widened, but his eyes seemed to narrow slightly. "You didn't think I'd notice we're alone?" I froze, unsure of how to respond. Something about the way he said it sent a chill through me, but I pushed the feeling away. After all, he wasn't real, just a creation of my own mind. I sat down across from him and held out my hand. "I'm Claire," I said. "That's a beautiful name," he replied, his voice warm but laced with something I couldn't quite place. We talked for what felt like hours over cups of coffee we never actually drank. When he invited me to leave with him, I didn't hesitate. As we walked through town, I noticed old friends in the crowd, people I hadn't seen in years, but I ignored them, focusing only on Jack. Occasionally his appearance would flicker, his hair or clothes changing slightly. It frustrated me, knowing the dream was becoming unstable. I tried to fix it, brushing his hair back into place and muttering under my breath that he wasn't holding together. He smiled at me, his cheeks flushing, as if my actions were romantic instead of desperate. The dream started to collapse, the world around us dissolving into fog. I hurried us back to the apartment I'd imagined for us, desperate to escape the prying eyes of the dream characters. Alone at last, he kissed me. The world around us faded, But the kiss remained vivid, almost too real. His lips were soft, warm, and electric, igniting every nerve in my body. It was perfection, a sensation that reality could never replicate. And then I woke up. I used to wake from dreams like that feeling euphoric, burrowing back under the covers, desperately trying to cling to the fragments of the dream before they slipped away. I'd replay the scenes over breakfast, every glance, every word, savoring the way he looked at me. Coffee in hand, I'd pour the memories into my dream journal, trying to capture every detail. I'd always start by piecing together the beginning of the dream, back when I didn't realize I was dreaming. That last one had started at work, another dull shift at the cafe. What tipped me off? Bad shifts happened all the time. Nothing unusual there. It wasn't until I remembered Sarah's face that I felt the unease creep in. There was something wrong about it. Unnatural. Her expression, the way her features looked slightly off. I hadn't noticed until I counted my fingers, but after that, I knew she wasn't right. An entire month passed before I became lucid again. This time I was wandering through a sprawling mall with a group of friends, old friends I hadn't seen in years. My subconscious seemed to love dragging me back into my past. We stopped by a large decorative fountain, and the conversation grew heated. I can't remember what we were arguing about, but it felt important in the moment. Then Lydia turned to me, her voice sharp and accusing. "Don't you feel any remorse, Rachel?" she said, her eyes narrowing. Time seemed to grind to a halt, like the cogs in my mind had rusted over. Oh, I thought. I glanced down at my hands, the only thing that still felt real in the fabricated world around me. Too many fingers. Far too many. I laughed aloud, a wild, unrestrained sound. Once again, I was standing in the middle of my own creation, the architect of this strange, shifting reality. I turned to look at the others, marveling at the scene. But when I turned back to Lydia, the joy drained from me. Her face had changed. It was still hers, but not really. Her hair hung limp and colorless, her jaw stretched unnaturally wide, and her skin clung to her bones as though it had been vacuum sealed. "Don't do that," she said softly, her voice hollow, as she slowly shook her head. A cold weight settled in my chest, heavier with each breath. Everything about the moment felt wrong. I turned to the others for reassurance, but as I focused on them, they disappeared, fading like smoke. "This is my dream," I whispered, trying to steady myself. "I'm in control." I closed my eyes and snapped my fingers, willing her away. But when I opened them, she was still there, her eyes darker now, her skin a sickly gray. "You're not Lydia," I said firmly, the words trembling in my throat. I'd meant it as a reminder to myself that she wasn't real, but she smiled at me, a slow, knowing grin that curled unnaturally at the edges of her face. She tilted her head, just like Sarah had in the cafe dream. The realization hit me like ice water. She wasn't Lydia, and she wasn't Sarah either. She was something else entirely. Panic surged through me. I shut my eyes again, trying to block her out. This is my dream. I'm in charge. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make her disappear. When I dared to peek, her form burned into my vision like a flash of lightning. Her face, her grin, was grotesque, her wide black eyes drilling into me. I clenched my jaw, shaking my head violently. I won't let this happen. My own mind was betraying me, turning my sanctuary into a nightmare. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up over and over. And then I did. I bolted upright in bed, the room dark and silent. My method had worked, as it always did when I wanted to escape a nightmare. Heart pounding, I got out of bed and shuffled to the window, pulling the curtains aside. The streetlights outside burned bright against the inky black sky, but something felt wrong. I glanced down at the fabric in my hands. I couldn't feel it. Why had I even checked the window for the time instead of reaching for my phone? And why hadn't I tripped over the mess of wires by my bed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Of course, I was still dreaming. I smiled to myself, relieved I hadn't lost the chance to turn the nightmare into something better, but the street outside was blanketed in thick, unnatural fog that refused to dissipate, no matter how hard I tried to change it. Then, a face flashed through my mind, a wide, chilling grin that sent shivers down my spine. My gaze snapped to the bedroom door. It was barely visible in the shadowy room, just a vague outline. The dread returned, suffocating and paralyzing. I didn't want to look at the door, but I didn't want to look outside either. The fear was the same, the kind I'd felt when I looked at Lydia. I held my breath, bracing myself for the inevitable. I closed my eyes again, surrendering to the darkness. Something was here. I could feel it. Then I felt it. A hand, warm and firm, closing around mine. "Mason?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" The hand squeezed mine gently. I opened my eyes, and there he was. Mason stood beside me, wearing the baseball cap he used to wear when we first met. His smile was calm, reassuring. "What's wrong?" he asked, his thumb brushing softly against the back of my hand. "Nothing," I stammered, my voice unsteady. I thought someone else was here." "Just me," he said, leaning down to press a kiss to my forehead. It didn't feel like the polished, idealized version of him I usually dreamed up. This felt real, like the Mason I used to know, the one who understood me better than anyone else. I pulled him closer, breathing in his familiar scent, a mix of violets and something warm, earthy. "I miss you," I murmured. I shook him harder, desperation crawling up my spine as I felt the cold air turn even more biting around us. The boat creaked softly in the water, a hollow sound that echoed like an omen. "Miles, please," I begged, but his body remained stiff, unresponsive. I could feel the frantic pulse in my throat, the rising panic that churned in my gut. He was slipping away, like everything in these dreams always did, into a darkness I couldn't control. I looked around, the world warping and distorting as if it was being pulled by an unseen force. The once vibrant sunset turned black, the colors of the sky bleeding into each other, leaving a void that swallowed us whole. The boat began to rock violently, as though it was no longer just a dream, but something far more sinister. I could hear the sound of water splashing against the edges, but it wasn't the gentle ripple from the sea. It was a violent, angry crash. I glanced at his face, his lips still blue, and my heart sank. The more I looked at him, the more he seemed to change, his features twisting into something alien. His eyes, once familiar, became black voids, hollow and cold, staring right through me. His smile, if you could call it that, was a grotesque mockery of the warmth I once knew, stretched too far, too wide. His body seemed to be twisting unnaturally, as though the dream itself was rejecting him. "No," I whispered, stepping back, but the dream refused to release its grip. I was trapped, caught between the horrific reality of what I was witnessing and the suffocating grip of the dream that refused to let me wake up. "You're not him." He tilted his head, that same eerie smile widening. But it wasn't Miles anymore. It was something else entirely. Something dark. Something that belonged in the nightmares I had never asked for. I wanted to scream, to force myself awake, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those eyes, staring back at me, impossible to escape. The boat continued to rock, the water pounding against the sides like an angry, relentless beast. I tried to wake up, to force my way out of this nightmare, but the world around me seemed to mock me, refusing to bend to my will. Suddenly, the boat pitched violently and I was thrown into the water. Cold, crushing water enveloped me, dragging me down deeper into the darkness. I kicked, struggling to break free, but the more I fought, the more the water closed in around me. The pressure was unbearable, and I could feel my lungs burning as I gasped for air that wasn't there. I opened my eyes, only to find myself staring at the same black void I had been trying to escape. The water turned to shadow, the darkness closing in on me. This wasn't just a dream anymore. It was something worse, something that knew I was awake, knew I was aware, and it was using that knowledge to trap me. I woke with a jolt, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the silence suffocating. I was back in my bed, but the feeling of the water's weight still clung to me, suffocating. I counted my fingers out of habit, 10, as always. But even that simple act felt wrong. Everything felt off, like I was still in the dream, still fighting to wake up. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. No, not his face. The thing that had taken his form. It was waiting for me to fall asleep again, to let it in. It knew how to manipulate the edges of my reality, how to twist my fears into something real, something tangible. I had to get up, I had to do something, anything to break the cycle. But the more I moved, the more I realized that the dream was still in me, crawling beneath my skin, lurking in the corners of my mind. It wasn't over. It would never be over. I tried to shake it off, but the weight of the nightmare clung to me like a shadow. What if the dream wasn't just a dream anymore? What if it had found a way to follow me into the waking world? I didn't know what was real anymore. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him shifting, probably sitting up in bed, just like I was. The weight of the silence pressed down on me, making the air in the room feel thick and suffocating. I wasn't sure if he had heard me properly, or if he was just letting me figure out how to say what I needed to. Finally, his voice broke through the quiet. "It's okay," he said, soft and understanding, the tone I remembered so well, the one that always made me feel safe. "Take your time." "What's going on?" The words caught in my throat, stuck behind the fear and the guilt that had been suffocating me for so long. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, but I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve my brokenness or the darkness that had followed me everywhere. I don't know where to start," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm having these dreams, Miles, and they feel so real. I don't know what's happening to me. It's like I can't escape them, no matter what I do. They follow me, they haunt me." I could hear him shifting again, maybe sitting up further, his concern palpable even through the phone. "What kind of dreams?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The warmth of his concern made something in my chest tighten. I hadn't heard him like this in over a year, not since everything had fallen apart. I wanted to tell him everything, but I didn't know how to explain the horrors I'd been enduring. How do you tell someone you've been seeing things that shouldn't exist, or that you've felt like you're losing yourself in something you can't control? It's like... I paused, struggling to find the right words. It's like I'm trapped between waking and sleeping. My dreams, they bleed into reality, and I can't tell the difference anymore. I see things, Miles, things that aren't real, people that aren't real, and sometimes I think I'm going crazy. I expected him to be quiet, to process what I was saying, but instead, he responded quickly, his voice thick with concern. "You're not crazy. I know it feels like that, but you're not. Listen, whatever you're dealing with, I'm here. I'm right here, and you don't have to go through this alone." His words hit me harder than I expected. I felt a tightness in my chest, a lump that I couldn't swallow down. I didn't deserve him, didn't deserve his kindness after everything I had done, but his voice, his reassurance, made me feel like I wasn't entirely lost. Like there was still a part of me that could be saved, even if it was just a flicker of hope. "I miss you, Miles," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I miss you so much." The silence on the other end was painful, heavy with unspoken words. I could feel him listening, waiting for me to continue, but I wasn't sure if I had the strength to say anything more. The guilt, the longing, the fear, everything was crashing over me, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. "I miss you too," he finally said, his voice quiet but steady. "But you need to take care of yourself. I know it's hard, but you can't keep running from this. You have to face it, whatever it is. You're stronger than you think." I was frozen, unable to respond, as his words settled in my mind. Stronger than I think? How could I be strong when everything around me was falling apart? How could I face the nightmares that had become my reality? But I couldn't stay trapped in this cycle forever. The fear, the confusion, the guilt. It was overwhelming, yes, but I couldn't let it consume me. Not again. How do I start? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused for a moment as if considering how to help me. Start small, one step at a time. You don't have to fix everything at once, okay? But you have to choose to fight. You have to choose to wake up, even when it's hard. The words hit me like a punch to the chest, but this time they didn't feel like a weight. They felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to. I wasn't alone in this. Maybe, just maybe, I could find my way out of the dark. Thanks, Miles, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of relief and sadness. There was another long pause, and then, with a smile in his voice, he said, "You're welcome, just don't forget I'm here, okay?" I nodded, though I knew he couldn't see it. "I won't. I promise." We said our goodbyes, and as I ended the call, I felt a small spark of hope flicker inside me. The nightmare wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to fight back. The line went silent for a while, long enough that I began to question whether Miles was still on the other end. I was almost afraid to speak, afraid that if I did, I might ruin whatever fragile connection I had left with him. But finally, his voice came through again, low and careful. "Is everything all right?" I choked back a sob, the weight of his concern crushing me. "Sort of," I whispered. I really need to talk to you. In person." The silence stretched between us like a yawning abyss. I braced myself for his rejection, for the anger, for the resentment, but instead, his voice was steady. "Okay," he said. "I'll come over. Just tell me when." I could hardly believe it. "Thank you," I gasped, my hands trembling as I clutched the phone. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me," he replied sharply, though his tone wasn't unkind. "I'll listen, but this won't happen again. You're not going to drag me back into this." "I know," I whispered, nodding even though he couldn't see me. "I understand." But before I could say anything more, the phone buzzed in my hand, and I pulled it away to see an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. With a flash of irritation, I almost ignored it, but then I saw the name. It was Miles's mother. I answered quickly, my heart sinking. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely audible. "Have you spoken to Miles?" came her voice, crackling with tension. "Where is he?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "He was just about to drive over to see me." "Was he driving?" she repeated, her voice rising with urgency. I froze, staring at the phone, my mouth going dry. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to speak. "Why?" "Because he's dead, Andrea," she screamed, her voice breaking with anger and grief. "You told him to drive in these conditions, and now my son is gone. He drowned because of you." I felt the world tilt beneath me, the ground slipping away as the words crashed over me. No, that's not true," I muttered, shaking my head, but the image of the cold, lifeless body in my mind wouldn't let go. I hung up abruptly, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I stared at my hand, counting the fingers. 8. 8 fingers. It couldn't be real, I told myself. It had to be a nightmare. Miles was fine. I was just imagining things. But as the panic flooded back into my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When I finally opened my eyes again, I was no longer in my room. I was lying in a hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling the air. My mother was by my side, holding one of my hands, and Miles was sitting beside me, his hand cold as ice in mine. I pulled my hand away and counted again. 8 fingers. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. "It's not real. It can't be." I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. "Please," I whispered. "I just need to wake up." But when I opened my eyes, Miles was still there, though something was different about him. His eyes were darker, more hollow, and his skin had a sickly pallor. He looked wrong. His hand, still in mine, felt like ice. I couldn't understand why, but something inside me told me this wasn't the Miles I had known. He wasn't the same person anymore. As I stared at him, his lips parted, a faint cough escaping his throat. I recoiled in horror as water began to spill from his mouth, his face contorting in a desperate struggle to breathe. I tried to reach for him, but my body felt paralyzed, as if I couldn't move. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't want this. I never wanted this." He couldn't hear me. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring right through me as though I didn't exist. The water kept coming, pouring from his mouth in a steady stream. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew it was too late. He was gone. And I had failed him. "Please," I cried out, struggling to sit up. "Please forgive me. I never meant for this to happen." But my mother's voice cut through the room, cold and detached. "He can't hear you, sweetheart." My heart shattered as I watched him convulse, the blood dripping from his nose, his face contorted in pain. "No, no, please," I screamed, trying to pull away from my mother's grip, but she wouldn't let me go. "Miles, I wish it had been me. I wish it had been me instead of you." The world around me seemed to fall apart, the edges of reality blurring as I fell into a deep, suffocating despair. And then, at 8:43 a.m., I was driving. The road was slick with rain, the heavy weight of my thoughts pulling me under. I couldn't stop thinking about that fight, about the way things had ended between us. I had been angry, so angry, and now it was too late. He was gone. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him sitting there, the way I always did in my dreams. But this time, all I saw was the reflection of myself, broken and lost. The phone rang. I didn't want to pick it up, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was distorted, crackling with static. "Murderer," it said, the word echoing in my ears like a death sentence. I slammed my foot on the gas, the car hurtling toward the lake. The water was waiting. It was all I could think about. The cold, the darkness, the end. The car plunged into the water, the crash deafening. I unfastened my seatbelt, crawling toward the passenger side, just as I had in that moment from my memories. But this time, it wasn't the same. This time, the cold water wasn't enough to numb the pain. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw it. The thing that had been lurking in the shadows of my mind, watching me drown, its black eyes staring back at me. But I didn't have the strength to fear it anymore. The water filled my lungs, but it wasn't the drowning that consumed me. It was the weight of everything I had done, the guilt, the regret, the endless torment. And when my last breath left my body, all I could think was that I hoped the nightmares would end. But they didn't.